we're hanging with the Dalai Lama, like in a parking lot. That sums up the 70s, doesn't it? Talking to the Dalai Lama in a parking lot. There's a great website. It's like, did the Buddha actually say that? .com or something like that, where you can type in, find peace in your next breath, the Buddha. And it's like, he never said that.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, and now it's like cocaine pirates, like hiding their bushels of cocaine on the Mosquito Coast. This is for real, 100%. Playing Dwight Schrute on The Office was a natural offspring of me having bombed on Broadway. I'm so grateful for the pain that I went through, the anguish I went through of sucking on a stage in front of 600 people every night.
So story of Rainn told your way.
Yeah.
Your way. Your spiritual journey, your soul journey.
Where do we start?
The beginning?
Well, I've spoken about this a lot. I wrote a book called The Bassoon King, which is a kind of comedic memoir, but it also contains my spiritual journey. And I think the kind of most important seminal experience in my life was the fact that when I was about 2 years old, my mom and dad got a divorce, and I stayed with my dad. And he immediately, I think part of out of heartbreak and part of out of chaos and mental health issues, he moved to the jungles of Nicaragua. So I'm 3 years old, living on the Mosquito Coast, which is one of the craziest places on planet Earth. Like the confluence of cultures there. It's Creole culture, Mosquito Indian, Spanish culture. There's like the pirates used to hide out there in the lagoons. Like and now it's like cocaine pirates, like hiding their bushels of cocaine on the Mosquito Coast. This is for real, 100%. So I'm 3, 4, 4.5, 5 years old living on, and then he immediately got remarried to my stepmom, and they did not have a good marriage. When I was researching my book and I asked them, like, when did you know your marriage was not good? Like, how long did it take? And they were both about like 6 months in. Mm. So I was 3 and they'd gotten remarried, and 6 months in they knew, and they stayed together for the next 15 years. Mm. So that is a petri dish for a certain kind of human experience.
Right.
Where mother's not in my life, remarriage, unhappy marriage, and living in one of the most foreign environments you could possibly come to understand. Now you're 3 or 4, you're 4 years old, so you don't really see it as foreign. You're just like, oh, there's giant clouds of mosquitoes wherever you go, and there's leeches in the water, and monkeys climb around everywhere, and there's lizards running around in your room. That's just the way the world is, and it's magical. It was like living in a Gabriel Garcia Marquez novel. Yeah, my dad had malaria. I had amoebic dysentery. It's a rough place, and it's also an incredibly beautiful place. White sand beaches, and like when you picture like the word jungle in your mind, like that's Mosquito what it Coast. Is, like Robinson Crusoe jungle. And so there was a lot of beauty there. But then, so going forward in the journey, like then we moved to Olympia, Washington. And I start going to elementary school. I spoke fluent Spanish, which I subsequently and immediately forgot because I never used it. And my parents would try and speak Spanish to me, but I always insisted, no, I want to learn English and speak English. And so this was a very alienating experience. So I would say, like, what's the story of Rainn Wilson is alienated child seeking connection and coming back from the jungles of Nicaragua, living in a household with a deeply unhappy marriage. We were absolutely dirt poor. And I really mean that. Like I couldn't afford regular milk, so I drank powdered milk. Got all my clothes from the Salvation Army. My dad, I said, how much money were you making a year? I think he said it's $9,000 a year. And he was he was working in an after-school program, and my stepmom didn't work. And no relationship with my mom at all, who I knew existed, but maybe I saw a handful of times before I was like 15 or 16 and she came back into my life. So a deep sense of alienation from my surroundings. As you can tell, I've done a lot of therapy, so I've unpacked a lot of this
Well,
stuff.
in this moment, was there a peaceful place for you? Was there somewhere inner or outer you could go and feel held or connected or at peace?
No.
Not at all.
Well, I would say I found some solace in kind of play and imagination and books. So, but did that provide like real connection and meaning and safety? No, no, it didn't. It was a poor Band-Aid, but at least I had books. I was an avid reader and lived a lot in my head, in my own imagination. A lot of drawing, doodling, journaling, stories. Yeah, I loved anything involving like fantasy, magic, science fiction, aliens, that whole deal. So I wasn't so much of a part of it, but it was kind of escapism. And I would often come home from school and just read books till dinner and then have dinner. We'd watch some TV, I'd do some homework, and then I'd read books till I fell asleep. So just hundreds and hundreds of books, which in a way I'm kind of grateful for, being a part of those stories. And I think ultimately being an actor is similar to being a storyteller. So there's a connection there.
You were prepared.
My family were members of the Bahigh faith. And I will say that when I look back on my childhood, I'm so grateful for the experience of growing up in a faith. There were weekend activities. There were children's classes. You learned about spiritual values. There was great diversity in the Bahigh faith. It wasn't people of a particular class. There were very poor Baha'is, very wealthy Baha'is. There were very educated Baha'is, very, Baha'is with GEDs, and lots of different races, and Native American Baha'is, and a lot of singing, a lot of grassroots community. Baha'is don't have synagogues, we don't have churches, we don't have mosques. It's gathering in people's homes and creating community in people's homes. There's also no clergy in the Baha'is faith. So there's no one leading a liturgy or doing a sermon or a lecture that has any status above anyone else. So,
How old were you now? Was this in Nicaragua or was this when you moved
well,
to
we were
Washington
always
State?
Baha'is, but when I start remembering this Baha'i community,
Right.
I'm flash forward, I'm 5, 6, 7 years old.
Singing. What was your favorite song?
Oh, gosh, that's a great.
Will you sing it?
Will I sing my
And
favorite
Nazar
Baha'i song?
loves to sing. Maybe you both could sing.
Well, I'm going to listen to you sing.
Yeah.
I'm not a good singer, even though I'm doing a musical on Broadway right now. Kind of. Well, there's a very simple Persian song that takes the most important word or phrase in the Baha'i faith, which is Allahu Abha, which is God is glorious, God is all glorious. And it's a very simple kind of call and response
Do
chant.
you know it?
I don't know it. No.
Will you teach us?
Yeah.
If it's simple, we can learn
So,
it.
so it goes.
Yeah.
So you know how Muslims say Allahu Akbar, and that means God is great, and Baha'i say Allahu Abha, which is
God is
God
glorious.
is glorious.
Okay.
So it goes like this. It's very simple, and we can all sing it together. Allahu Abha, Allahu Abha, Allahu Abha, Allahu Abha.
That's
Sing
beautiful.
it with me. Allahu Abha, Allahu Abha, Allahu Abha, Allahu Abha. Again, there's something ancient and pure and incredibly powerful and beautiful about people coming together and singing, and they're not professionals. They're singing around a campfire. They're sitting in a cave around a fire and in song with one another. And I'm reading this book right now called The Way of the Bushmen. And and that's the oldest culture that on the planet that they can find. I think they've been living the same way for 10,000 years. I mean, they really were hunter-gatherers They're not even herdsmen. They weren't growing any agriculture. They just kind of wandered and lived off the land. And singing and dancing, an ecstatic dance and singing is so connected to the divine impulse and to the community impulse. You can't differentiate. It's not something you go do on the side. Ritual, singing, dancing, ecstatic vision, dreaming is all interwoven.
We do this all around the world in different ways, right? And what you're talking about is in the Baha'is spiritual community.
Well, and we're losing doing this around the world in various ways, especially with the kind of advent of Western culture. And as folks have, for a very good reason, given up organized religion for very good motivations, most of the time, we've lost that element of gathering just to sing. Sing with your neighbors.
Right.
And that most ancient of rituals. And here we are in the middle of this incredible mental health epidemic, this loneliness epidemic. This is, the focus of so much of your work. And I'm not necessarily suggesting like go join a church, but how do we find that same spirit of community and communion maybe in other ways? Maybe it is finding a church. You can always swing on by a Baha'i activity in your local community.
When you entered the Baha'i community, did you feel that you were free from that despairing loneliness that you'd felt as a child?
I would say that it was my main respite. So reading books and fantasy stories and also I loved television. I loved TV comedies. And they were my solace. I loved watching MASH and Bob Newhart and all the great, comedies, Mary Tyler Moore of the 70s. And there I am being a TV actor. These were my escapes. But the fulfillment that I got being a child and a teen in the Baha'i community with summer school, we would go Baha'i summer school, Baha'i winter school,
Well, you were even a
camps.
security guard at the Baha'i temple.
Yes. When I was 17, 18 years old, I was a security guard at the Baha'i House of Worship in Wilmette, Illinois. We lived right down the street from it because my parents worked at the Baha'i National Center, which was nearby. So that was a big part of my...
And you saw people coming, you welcomed them in, you were at the door.
Sure, yeah. People came from all over the world, people of all different faiths. The temple is there not just for Baha'is, it's for everyone. It's a beautiful center for...
Beautiful architecture.
Yeah,
Beautiful,
for communion and
Did
contemplation.
Did they, some of them were pilgrims, right? They'd come a long way to see the temple.
A lot of Baha'is would come to see the temple. It was called the Mother Temple of the West. The cornerstone of the temple, like literally there's a great story. You want to hear a great story?
Yeah, totally.
I forget the woman's name, but the Baha'is had bought this plot of land and were like, we're going to build a temple here. At the time, the son of the founder of the Baha'i faith was still alive. Abdul Baha was his title, which means servant of glory. There's that word Baha again, Allahu Abha, Abdul Baha. And he was planning on coming to the United States, and everyone was very excited. We were going to bring him out to Chicago, and we're going to show him this land, and he can break ground on the temple, and we're going to raise money, and we're going to build this beautiful temple. And this woman, and I'm forgetting her name, I'm sorry for all the Baha'is who are watching, I forget her name, I Google it. She was very poor and she wanted to bring something. And she went by a work site and she was like, hey, can I bring something to this temple? And they had like a chunk of like granite or something like that, or like a nice piece of stone. And she's like, oh, this is great. So she got a wheelbarrow and she put it in and she started wheeling from Chicago up to Wilmette this chunk of stone to add to the temple.
On foot.
On foot.
From
And
Chicago to Wilmette. Wow.
She didn't have any money. And then the wheelbarrow broke. And then I think she got like a blanket and was like dragging the stone. And I think some people helped her eventually, whatever. But the odyssey of this very poor woman bringing the stone to this groundbreaking ceremony. And then Abdu'l-Baha showed up. He had spent most of his life in prison in the Middle East because being a Baha'i was not a very popular thing among the Muslim clergies and authorities in the Ottoman Empire. And he heard the story of the stone, and he said, this is going to be the cornerstone of the temple.
Wow.
And for people who know, like every building has kind of a cornerstone, and it's a symbolic stone that anchors the energy of the building. And he like dug a little hole and he put the cornerstone in the ground, and he said, the temple has already been built.
Wow.
So you can see that stone when you go in the basement, when you go and visit the Baha'i house of worship that this woman brought up at great sacrifice.
At great sacrifice, yeah.
The stone of devotion.
Wow.
So I
What a
got to
cool
be a
story.
security guard there at the Baha'i temple.
And you've seen that very stone
Oh yeah.
and touched it.
Oh yeah.
What did it feel like?
In fact, there was a rumor going around like Baha'is worship a stone in the basement of the temple. It's like,
No, that's
there's
not
no
it.
worship. There's just this stone sticking out of the concrete. But
Just a story.
yeah, it's it's we live in symbols.
Yeah.
So it's a symbol of the temple. You don't need all that ornamentation. You need love and sacrifice and community to build something. My experience is that when we're in our teens and 20s and 30s, life is this crazy chaotic jumble, and you feel like a pachinko ball, right? Just going, oh, I'm going here. Oh, I moved to Cincinnati, and I got this job. Oh, we broke up. Oh, gosh, this happened. Oh, my mom got sick. I had to go home. You know, and that ball is, and then late 40s, 50s. I don't want to date myself, but you start to look back on it, and your life becomes kind of this perfectly calibrated tapestry, and you're like, oh, of course.
Right.
Of course, my life went like this. Of course, I felt alienated from this. And here's my spiritual journey. And then, you know, we'll get to the next chapter, which is one of disconnection and addiction and mental health difficulties in my 20s and kind of more of a spiritual quest. But you look back on it and things just seem to add up and make perfect sense. And in my case, at least, I feel a tremendous amount of gratitude for what I went through and the pain that I went through and the ups and downs and obstacles that I had that have brought me to this point. Because you're right. I mean, what I'm trying to do is I work on a number of different levels. First of all, I'm an actor, so I play weird, interesting roles in television and film and theater, and I love doing that. And it's, you know, it feeds my heart, and there's something very primal when I found acting. It really helped me so much. And then there's other kinds of storytelling, whether it's founding Soul Pancake, this digital media company, or Soul Boom, now this podcast and book, fostering spiritual conversation, trying to put inspiring content into the world, and trying to put some tools for mental health for young folk to think about, especially spiritual tools. That all is a perfect expression of this childhood, like pressure cooker, petri dish that I came out of.
Yeah.
Would you say you've hit your calling?
I think I have found my calling, yes. I think my calling is to entertain, make stories, and foster dialogue around spirituality and spiritual tools for mental health. And when I'm doing that, I feel in the pocket. I feel like, I'm doing what I need to be doing.
Always with the golden thread of comedy. I mean,
Yeah.
right? So comedy, what does it do? Comedy's divine.
Yeah, great question and great point, and thanks for bringing that up. One of the things I really is important to me is like, I'm not a guru. I don't have the answers. I'm not someone going on my Instagram like, hey guys, when you wake up, think about this, and you got to do this, and you got to think. There's a lot of people that do that. Some of them do it well. Some of them don't. I don't want to do that. I just want to foster a conversation. I'm on a journey too. I'm still figuring out Like, what does God mean? What does being a person of faith mean? You know, how do I tell better stories? You know, how can I bring people together in better ways? Like, how can I find more balance in my life? I'm on that journey too. I don't have the answers, but going to comedy, you know, I interview a lot of stand-up comics on the Soul Boom podcast. Part of the reason I do that is stand-ups will talk about their mental health journey with such rawness that no other kind of artist will. You try and bring an actor on or a musician, or it's very hard to get them to open up about how the sausage is made and how kind of fucked up they are. A stand-up comic will be like, I am so fucked up, you have no idea. When I was about to kill myself 3 times in 2004, this is what was going through my head. Like, they'll just lay it all out because that's what comics do. And I really admire that. But comedy is a number of different things. It can be a service, you know, making people laugh. That's great. But oftentimes it comes out of pain and comes out of personal pain as a coping mechanism. I'm this alienated, disconnected youth trying to fit in, kind of nerdy kid reading a lot of books and not having a lot of friends. And I loved and appreciated comedy, but I also saw that I could get people to like me through comedy. If I made them laugh, I could get more acceptance. If I made the class laugh, I became the class clown. It's a alienated youth to class clown to
Huge
improv
transition.
and acting to making that a profession is a pretty common thread.
Okay, so your 20s, you had a classic journey in your 20s.
Yeah.
A quest.
It didn't feel like a classic journey at the time, but it felt pretty raw and painful and like I was the only one going through it. But you're absolutely right. It's mythical, you know, and in like Joseph Campbell, Carl Jung kind of mythic quest of the young person.
And profoundly real. Yeah.
Yeah, I went to acting school. I jettisoned the Bahigh faith. I didn't want anything to do with faith and religion anymore. I didn't want morality. I wanted to have sex with my girlfriend and not feel guilty about it, basically. But I also wanted to party, and I wanted to like experience New York as a actor, bohemian, and not have like God and morality in church and kumbaya and Alawa Pa songs. Like I just
The one we
wanted,
just sang.
yeah, the one we just sang. I wanted to leave my parents and their dysfunctional marriage aside. And by the way, as soon as I left for college, they got a divorce. I mean, I left for college late August. By Halloween, they were divorced.
Wow.
So it was like, it was very clear they were kind of staying together to kind of raise me. And then I was gone and they're like, let's get the hell out of this marriage. So I didn't have much of a family at that point and was living in New York City and in kind of my mid-20s from like, let's say 24 to 32 or something like that. Like there were some dark and difficult times, great and deep unsettledness and unhappiness, which of course I tried to medicate with drugs and alcohol and pornography and anything else you can kind of fill what they say in the 12-step programs is the God-shaped hole. And but more than that, I really had an existential crisis of like, why am I alive? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Yes, I'm barely scraping by rent by being an actor, and that's great. And I'm building my resume and getting experience and doing theater. I did theater for like 10 years. But what is it all about? It really was a deep, like, what's the meaning of life? But maybe it was those Bahigh conversations about like, why are we here? What makes a human being? Do we have a soul? And is there a God? And what is our purpose? And how do we maximize our usness to live the most fulfilled life, both personally and societally as possible? I don't know if that makes sense. But the germs of those seeds of conversation were very much put into place as a young Bahigh growing up. And then I found myself really wrestling with those in my 20s. And I wouldn't say like, I was never like suicidal, you know. I don't want to paint the wrong impression, like, oh, I'm going to go jump off this bridge now or something like that. But I was like, well, why don't I kill myself? You know, it was kind of like, why am I alive? You know, which I think is an important question to ask.
Yes.
Totally.
You know, for those thinking about suicide, please call someone or get in touch with someone. I don't want this to be too triggering, but there's something underneath it, which is, why am I alive? And that kind of sent me on a spiritual journey.
And you found?
What do you do when you're 25, filled with anguish, and living in New York City and broke? Therapy wasn't an option. There were no apps. There's no Soul app. There's no resources around. There's no self-help books, you know. The Road Less Traveled, which I read, and it's great. That was
Did you
it.
sense it was a spiritual quest?
But this is the only thing I knew to do, was to go on a spiritual quest, because I didn't know what else to do.
Right.
But growing up Bahigh, I was like, well, maybe the answers are to be found in the world's great spiritual traditions. So I read the Bhagavad Gita, and I read the Quran, and I read the Bible, and I read Native American spirituality, and I investigated a spiritual path because I didn't know where else to turn. I mean, I literally didn't know. What do you do, you know, in 1993 if you're in anguish and you don't have any money? What do you do? So it wasn't like, oh, I'm so enlightened, or I know something that other people don't, or something like that. It's like, I didn't know what
You
else.
wanted relief from your anguish.
Yeah, and I don't know what else to do. So I'll read the Buddha, the writings of the Buddha. Maybe he's got something.
Was there something there? Was
Oh,
there anything?
absolutely. Yeah. And I still read the writings of the Buddha. I won't say like every day. I would say every week. And not just like on Instagram, like the Dhammapadas, you know, and, you know, go to the source. There's a great website. It's like, did the Buddha actually say that .com or something like that, where you can type in, because there's so many quotes of people like, find peace in your next breath, the Buddha. And it's like, he never said that. You know what I mean? Like, people just make up quotes for the Buddha. And but Buddhism is all about where the rubber meets the road, about unhappiness, and has a lot of really profound solutions for disconnection, and then kind of entire purpose of at least modern Western style of Buddhism. It's very different if you go to Thailand or China or Nepal. You know, it looks very different. Is life is suffering. Why do we suffer? We suffer from attachments. Non-attachment relieves suffering. So it can be very helpful.
So for decades, from your 20s, your 30s, you've been finding, through Buddhism and other faiths, a spiritual way through, a spiritual understanding of suffering, a porthole.
Yeah, and it eventually led me back in my early mid-30s. It led me back to the Baha'i faith, because as a Baha'i, I get to love and appreciate the profundity of Buddhism, and I understand that the Buddha was a specially anointed divine teacher that has brought solace. And the same with Jesus, and the same with Abraham and Moses, and with the prophet Muhammad. And all of the great spiritual traditions are under the umbrella of Baha'i, as well as its own revelation from its prophet founder, Baha'u'llah. Unlike, there's certain sects of Christianity, because remember there's 2,000 sects of Christianity, that would say the Buddha is a satanic influence and is not divine and is not helpful. And because Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life, there's no way to the Father except through me, that negates any and all wisdom traditions. But as a Baha'i, I don't jibe with that. So I get to include lots of different spiritual traditions in my journey.
So when you and I'm so grateful, had the opportunity because of the kindness of Arthur Brooks, right?
Right?
To meet His Holiness, the Dalai Lama.
That's right.
What was that like for you?
Well, he's in very ill health, as we know, in advanced age. And obviously, sounds dumb, but he's a hero of mine because his closest family members and people from his monastery and his people that he's the spiritual leader of and the symbol of were killed by the thousands of in the Chinese invasion of an annexation of Tibet. And yet he lives a life not of revenge and retribution and resentment, but of love and healing and forgiveness. And what he spoke of love and the importance of love. And he just always brought everything back to love. I don't know if you remember that, but Arthur Brooks would ask him a question like, what is the meaning of life? Love. And he would go off and about love. Like, why is it that we get so easily distracted in the Western world? And we're like, we need more love. And everything was just like love, love, love. And that's a universality of every faith tradition, right? Mm-hmm. Love thy neighbor. God is love. Love is all you need. The Beatles.
Yeah.
And it's funny, my stepdad, married to my birth mother that I got to know later as a teenager, he was like, oh, we went to go see the Dalai Lama speak once in the 70s. And then we ran into him in the parking lot. And a bunch of folks just were like chatting to the Dalai Lama in like the parking lot of like an event space. And he's like, oh, hey. And it's like, we're hanging with the Dalai Lama like in a parking lot.
Things were different in the 70s.
Yeah. That sums up the 70s, doesn't it? Talking to the Dalai Lama in a parking lot.
Earlier you said, it's clear that I've been in therapy and I've unpacked a lot of these things. It's very clear to me you've got a real wisdom about you. You've figured stuff out. And it's remarkable to me kind of how you've taken the pain that you've gone through and the journey you've gone through, and then you've manifested it in the world through these initiatives and endeavors that you focus on, which are helping so many people. It's really cool. I'm such a huge fan of
Well,
of
you
what
guys
you're doing in the
are
world.
very flattering, and I really appreciate it. Here's the deal. Like, the truth is, I have a big ego. I tend towards narcissism. I tend towards pessimism. And I'm easily anxious with an anxiety disorder, and I get disgruntled a lot. That's the reality of who I am. I'm not arrived. The Buddha, the name means the awakened one. I'm not awakened. I'm not. But I just try, and I struggle, and I share my journey along the way, and I try and read and study and ponder, as I go along.
That
That's
makes
it.
you a great torchbearer.
Yeah, but what you just said is exactly what I'm talking about. Is like the old adage is know thyself. And you started your sentence by saying, I'm this unattractive quality. I'm that unattractive quality. I'm that unattractive quality. And you knowing that and knowing who you are enables you to be the best version of yourself, to accommodate those things and lean into the things that you do so well, right? And not get mired in the things that maybe would hold you back if you weren't aware of that.
There's a great exercise in the 12 steps, because I'm also a student of the 12 steps and a member of the 12 steps. And there's the 6th step is about character defects. And it's a step that I wish everyone would do. Like, make a list of your top character defects. Maybe boil them down to, my sponsor had me boil them down to like the top 5 or 6. I did like 20, and then I just boiled them down, and really get to know them and write about them. And then notice when they come up without any judgment. I'm impatient. Oh, here's where my impatience shows up. And I write about it and learn about it. And then you get to live with your character defects. They're just, they're on your sleeve. Yeah. And then they hold less power over you.
It's liberating.
Because you are just, hey, I'm impatient. I'm judgmental. I can be a narcissist.
It's okay.
I can be really
Yeah.
like unempathetic and insensitive, and just ask my wife. And this is just part of who I am, and it's okay because we all have them, you know?
The number one user complaint on Soul, because we do this personality analysis, we say, here's some of your most attractive qualities, and then here's some of your biggest challenges. We call it your biggest challenges. And people respond, they don't respond about their positive qualities. They respond about the biggest challenges, like, I'm not narcissistic. And you're like, okay, all right.
Right.
You know?
Right.
But
But,
I mean,
but then you get to also learn about your character assets and what you bring to the table and positive qualities that you have. So you take the shame out of it, right? Like there's no shame in being impatient and judgmental and insensitive. It's how you're wired.
Yeah.
It's parents, it's DNA, it's background, and yeah.
in fact, I would say, as a scientist, that's how we're built.
Mm.
You have realized the road in to an awakening. And it is through the road of trials, and it is through struggle and incompleteness and suffering and despair, the way in to an awakening.
So I wrote a book called Soul Boom.
Yes.
Came out last year.
Magnificent book.
Why we need a spiritual revolution. And one of the points I make in Soul Boom that comes from the Bahigh faith, and I find incredibly inspiring, is that every human has a twofold moral purpose. And when I say it, it's going to sound kind of obvious, but I think people are very disconnected from this idea. And that is, we have our personal moral purpose. I talk about it in terms of television shows, the show Kung Fu, but to become more wise, more kind, more compassionate, to find internal spiritual tools like prayer and meditation, contemplation, connection that enrich us, that feed our souls, that make our hearts bigger. Now, a lot of people do that work and they stop. And that's kind of how I would describe the New Age movement. It's like, I want to increase my heart and I want to decrease my anxiety. So I'm going to do these various tools, and then that's, and hey, my life's better now, and I'm going to stop right there. The other part of the twofold moral purpose is, what is our moral obligation to relieve the suffering of others?
Bravo.
Yeah.
And the Buddha talks about this, and it's not talked about so much, but the Buddha, the whole point of Buddhism, and Thich Nhat Hanh talked about it in the best possible ways, is we decrease our anxiety and increase our presence so that we can take that energy and reduce the suffering of others
Bingo.
in some way, shape, or form.
I agree. I think,
100%.
Rainn, comedy is service. You want to alleviate suffering? I mean, it doesn't matter
It's a
what
great
I'm
way to do
going
it.
through.
Yeah. It's a great way to do it.
Well, I'm doing this very silly musical theater piece right now. It's a revival of Urinetown, the musical, which was very well known about 20 years ago. People know this. It's kind of turned into a classic musical, but I tell you, the ecstasy that the audiences are in watching it is rapturous, because it's rough times right now, and people want to laugh, and they want to be transported, and they want music. It also,
They want music and community combined.
and to sit in a theater with 2,000 other people and to laugh together is incredibly powerful.
Is there a moment in your life where you're looking at something you wanted to do? Let's call it a red door that you really wanted to go through. And then there's this other door. Let's call it a yellow door that presented itself somehow. And you thought maybe you wanted to really go through the red door, but something happened. Something inspired you to go through that yellow door. And going through that door led you to become the person you are today. Was there a moment in your life where something like that happened? A sort of pivot point?
Boy, that's a great question. And there's so many things that pop up in my head when you say that. I will say that because I'm doing theater now in New York, as I'm talking to you here in the studio in Manhattan. Back when I was a theater actor, I had an incredible opportunity as a young actor to have a starring role in a Broadway play at the Roundabout Theater Company. And I barely had an agent at the time. I didn't have much of a career. It was an incredible opportunity. And the pressure of that was enormous. And because I knew months in advance I was going to be playing this role. So I kind of pre-memorized my lines. I kind of figured out how I wanted to act my role, which is a terrible mistake. You need to find it in rehearsal with the other actors and with the director. You know, pre-make decisions and line readings. I felt this pressure to like, oh, I could get a better agent. Oh, I could get a New York Times review. I could get a Tony Award nomination. The pressure was enormous on my 27-year-old shoulders or whatever, however old I was. And I sucked. I was bad. I bombed. So what I thought I wanted, like this kind of like theater stardom and a Tony Award and to be at the William Morris Agency and get a New York Times review, like that pressure made me a really false actor and a bad actor. And I really sucked in the role. I got bad reviews. It was a good production. Otherwise, I just was not good. And I went through hell because I knew I wasn't good and I couldn't get out of it. And my wife was in grad school at the time. I was crying to her on the phone every night. I was just in anguish and misery. And I came out of that thinking I wanted that thing. And then I had this incredible freedom when the show was done. And I was like, fuck that. I don't ever want to be beholden to some idea of what I should be as an actor. I have to be me. I'm weird. I'm offbeat. I'm alienated. I'm a goofball. That's who I am. I'm not going to try and be something that I think other people want me to be. And I fired my useless agents at the time, and I had no agent, and I was just like, fuck it, I'm just going to make my own way in this business. And it wasn't long after that I created a comedy show with some friends that ended up taking me to LA. It was called The New Bozina. And then we got a deal at Fox, and then I got a manager, and then I started working in TV and film. And as I worked in TV and film, I just embraced my inner weirdo, for lack of a better term. But I would say more truthfully, I found my authentic voice as an actor and an artist. So playing Dwight Schrute on The Office was a natural offspring of me having bombed on Broadway. What I thought I wanted, I crashed and burned and spectacularly failed. But that opened another door to an authentic expression of who I was as a comedian, actor, artist. And that allowed me to get on this great TV show and have a wonderful career doing that. So I'm so grateful for the pain that I went through, the anguish I went through of sucking on a stage in front of 600 people every night.
You know, the Bahaighness with which you were raised, that got into you, the Bahaighness, it ushered you through the spiritual quest. It gave you a universal roadmap of our spiritual reality. And it feels to me that now in this chapter, you are a maestro in helping to create a global civil society. I mean, here we are. It's now a tiny planet, and anyone in Gen Z or younger is connected as one people. They don't identify with their bio bodysuit. They marry who they love from any corner of the world. It's time for a global civil society, and it seems to me that your Baha'i compass is really quite profound in guiding us into what this can look like.
I believe the Baha'i faith allows a roadmap that Baha'u'llah's revelation and teachings and the way the faith is set up, it's a roadmap forward for humanity, a spiritual transformation where we are living not in self-centeredness, but in other-centeredness and in service and in building community at the grassroots in such a way that humanity's inevitable spiritual maturation is going to happen. Baha'u'llah tells us that we're going to live in peace and harmony someday. We have to. We may destroy ourselves in the process, or to what degree we destroy ourselves in the process of trying to get there, but eventually there will be world peace, and humanity will be sharing the resources of this planet with love and compassion and peace. And young people don't believe that that's possible. But it's important to know that, as corny as it sounds, world peace is possible.
Yes.
We can get there.
And the Dalai Lama agreed with you when we went to see the Dalai Lama. That was his view too. It was only through love that we would have world peace.
Yeah.
And science even mirrors that we're built to be in a sustained state of relational spirituality. That's actually how the human is composed, hardwired.
Yeah.
We can realize our nature.
I 100% agree. And I think one of the things I talk about in Soul Boom is like, the popular story of humanity is that we're always backstabbing each other and clubbing each other and raping each other and at each other's throats. And we're a violent, unhinged species and it's survival of the fittest. And there is certainly, you can find a million examples of humanity behaving in that way. But we don't tell the other story of humanity. The other story of humanity is that we collaborated, we traded, we got along, we evolved, we learned from each other.
100%.
Well, and as families. So I want to point out that I happen to know that both of you are very spiritual fathers, spiritual dads. What do you want for your children?
It's pretty simple. I want my son to have hope, and I want him to walk on that twofold moral path. It's just meat and potatoes. I want him to have hope, and I want him to know that he can transform himself, and he can take that transformative power and be of service to others. I don't care if he's a Bahigh or Buddhist or born-again Christian, or if he's spiritual but not religious. You don't necessarily need a faith to walk that walk, but I want to empower him to be on that path.
And when you're in meditation or when you're in prayer, where do you go? Are you talking to someone? Are you talking to God?
Yeah, so I'm old school. The most powerful prayer to me is one to God, the creator, the divine force, the unknowable essence beyond time and space and all human comprehension, all the source of all beauty, all power, all majesty, all love, all art and creativity. Thy will, not mine, be done. My will gets me in a lot of trouble. My will wants money and ego and accolades and things to get done the way I want them. So in that act of surrender and prayer, I find great power in that act of surrender. Thy will, not mine, be done. The way that I experience being in God's will is it's like a sailboat. I've never really been sailing. I don't know much about sailing, but I do know that you feel it when the winds are kind of taking you in the right direction. And it's a feeling and it's a movement. And so I try and attune myself to that kind of more mystical propulsion that feels like, okay, you're kind of going in the right direction here. You're
I
going
love
the right
that
way.
visualization. That's so profound.
Whereas we know sometimes you're when you're going against the wind on the sailboat, you're tacking, you're going left and right, and it's hard, and the water's choppy, and maybe you need to do that for a while because we all have our struggles, but maybe that's not the direction the winds of the universe are propelling you. So how do you become more finely attuned, more sensitively attuned to a certain direction?
This has been an amazing conversation.
Thank you.